to the Zoom room, and then we will get started. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are coming from, and welcome to part 3 of the WIDA Academy's intensive trade seminar focused on India. We'd like to give a special thanks today to our WIDA International sponsors whose support enable us to make this seminar free to attend for guests joining us from anywhere in the world: the National Pork Producers Council, Trade Data Monitor, Visa, Personal Care Products Council, Coupang, the Information Technology Industry Council, Mondelez International, the U.S. Council for International Business, and the National Foreign Trade Council. We'd also like to thank our WIDA Academy sponsors who support all of WIDA's educational activities: the American Apparel and Footwear Association, the Christina Bachieiter Charitable Trust, Microsoft, and Coupang. The seminar is broken up into 3 parts. In part 1, we discussed major trade policy and strategic issues facing the U.S. and India's global relations. Yesterday, we discussed key economic competitiveness drivers in the Indian economy and digital trade. For today's final session, we're going to focus on challenges and opportunities in 3 vital sectors: biopharmaceuticals and healthcare, critical minerals, and emerging technologies. Some reminders as we begin today's sessions: your link for the seminar is good for all of today's sessions. If you get disconnected or need to log off and back in, the same link will work for all the sessions this morning and should let you back into the live session. If for some reason you missed one of the sessions, we'll send around a link so you can watch the recordings. Yesterday, we sent around links to registered attendees to watch the recordings from sessions 1 and 2. And later today, we hope to send the recordings from today's sessions. You can ask questions of our discussants using the Q&A tab on the Zoom screen. And you should have all received an email this morning with the agenda and panelist biographies, so we will not need to have lengthy introductions. Today, we're joined by 375 guests from 24 different countries. And as you know, if you've watched parts 1 and 2, we like to call out the names of some of those you are in community with in Zoom, even if you can't see them on camera. So coming to us today from India, we have Binjay Gupta at Geosynthesis, Saida Borchmeyer at the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, Ganesh Sivemani at the Center for Social and Economic Progress, and Salil Muhan at Agratas, which is a Tata enterprise. Welcome, Binay, Cinda, Ganesh, and Salil, and thank you for joining us this evening in India. I'd like to ask our first panel to now please turn on their cameras. I'd note that we are having this discussion at 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time on Thursday, May 21st. And as we say at all our events, podcasts, and at this seminar, what we are talking about today may have changed if you're listening or watching a recording of the discussion at a later date. 15 years ago, I worked at a major innovative biopharmaceutical company, and India was always at the forefront of our global planning. If anything, this sector has grown in importance in the past decade, and we've got a great panel assembled to discuss both the opportunities and those challenges facing the sector. So I'd like to welcome Philip Chen, who's a Deputy Vice President for International at PhRMA. He's a former Deputy Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Innovative and Intellectual Property. Sudarshan Jain is a Secretary General at the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance and Chairman of the Indian Institute of Health Management. Aileen Nandi is a Vice President of Global Strategy and Analysis at AdvaMed. And our moderator today, Brajesh Barse, who's Senior Director of Lifesciences at the U.S.-India Business Council. Dr. Barse? You are muted.
Thanks, Ken, for the introduction. I think it's great. And you have just saved my few minutes by introducing all my panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it's really great and a good time to initiate the discussion on the pharmaceuticals, life sciences, and the biopharmaceuticals. And I think we have very eminent people today in this panel. All 3 are handling a big portfolio from the US side on pharmaceuticals and the medical devices, and from the Indian side, Sudarshan Jain is like leading the whole Indian pharmaceutical ecosystem. That's really great. And I think the healthcare partnership between India and the US evolved into one of the most significant in this time. And we are making a lot of strategic and economic relationship. And over the last 2 decades, we can see that both the countries have built up a kind of a complementaries across the pharmaceutical and medical technology sector, whether it is like a digital health or the artificial intelligence and so on. So this is a good time because India today is playing a vital role in this global healthcare supply chain as a trusted manufacturers of the medicines and the vaccine, while the US is always continue to leading in the innovation part. So that's the complementary things are happening between these two countries and the medical technology development as well. So together, these two countries have demonstrated how the collaboration can strengthen the global health resilience and improve patient access and accelerate innovations. At the same time, this sector is entering in a period of a major transformation. Like the AI is coming, precision medicine is coming, the digital health technologies are coming, advanced diagnostics are coming. So these developments are creating a new opportunity in the deeper US-India relationship in terms of the collaboration and research and manufacturing on the innovations. So today's discussion, I would like that it comes a very important moment as both the government and industry leaders are increasingly focusing on building trusted healthcare partnership. So there is a lot of predictability over there, and then we are ensuring the regulatory reforms so that the both the countries are having a good relations and and the research ecosystem. Now, I just had this kind of a thought. I think this kind of a discussion where Phil is there, Sudarshan ji is there, and Aileen is there. So we can cover up the major of the points. So I just wanted to have your thought, Phil, on especially on the innovation ecosystem and the investment climate. As you know, at the time when companies are making a long-term investment in advanced therapies or in the drug discovery or global R&D partnership, what do you think? What kind of a policy and the regulatory factors are most critical for strengthening the innovation confidence and the deeper US-India collaboration? I just need your thought on that, and then in the similar line, I'll go with the Sudarshan Genji, and then later on the medical side, I'll go to Eileen. So Phil, it's on you.
Great. Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you to WIDA for putting together this event on US-India trade relationship. And I think we really appreciate it and this opportunity to talk about the exciting things that are happening in the biopharmaceutical sector. You're right, there are many dynamic changes that are going on in the space. I would say from the perspective of patient health and scientific advancements in medicine, this really is an amazing period. There's been so many developments in therapies for cancer, breakthroughs in technology such as mRNA vaccines that offer potential therapies for many conditions. So I think you phrased it correctly that how do we build on this context by putting together the strengths of the US-India relationship. And I can just give a perspective from pharma, from our member companies that focus on the development of innovative medicines. From the perspective of our member companies, the background is that developing a first of a kind new medicine is always high risk. And on average, 90% of new drug candidates fail, and research and development often takes nearly a decade from the bench to the pharmacy. So, from our perspective, we're engaged in an area where everything is basically a long shot. And so for companies in this space to grow and thrive, particularly in the US-India relationship, they're looking for an environment that has three characteristics. First is effective protections for intellectual property and regulatory data. Two, predictable science-based regulation and harmonization. And three, market access and open trade. And I can touch on these really quickly before handing it back to you. Effective protections for intellectual property and regulatory data from our companies' perspectives are critical because scientists need to know that their proprietary information is protected, and they also need sufficient exclusivity in order to be able to recoup the investment of time and resources. Uh, in the US, our system balances this innovation imperative together with access for patients through a balance between intellectual property and regulatory data conditions that expire. And striking that balance in the US has meant that generic medications today comprise 90% of all prescriptions, but the US is still the place where new medicines and therapies are discovered and first launch. So, ensuring that that factor is something that can be developed in the US and India will really help spur a lot of investment and the expansion of drug discovery. Likewise, predictable science-based regulation is also a very key factor because after or during the process of scientific discovery, and as you get closer to the launch of a medicine, it has to be determined to be both safe and effective by government regulators before it can be introduced into patient populations and distributed. And to have a predictable science-based system that is complementary in both countries is something that allows these discoveries to become more available. And third, that leads to both open trade and market access, investment and procurement policies that allow companies to make the most productive decisions in order to ramp up both discovery and manufacturing are also conditions that I think will benefit closer collaboration between the US and India. So why don't I turn it back over to you?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I think you have covered very well, and as American industry, you have given all your points. In the similar line, I just wanted to go to Sudarshan Jain ji, and then since you are talking about the innovations and the regulatory harmonization, the predictability and market access. So, Sudarshan ji, I just wanted to have your views on this India's transition to innovation-led growth. India has built like global leadership in the generics and the vaccines, and now the India industry moving towards the biologics and complex generics, and innovation is there on all such thing. So what do you think, what are the key opportunities and the challenges shaping this transition, and how you see this in the ecosystem?
So thank you very much, Dr. Brajesh. I will begin with all of us here. For us, patient is the center of everything what we do. And the three areas which are fundamental from patient point of view is innovation, access, and resilience. Resilient supply chain, which becomes very, very important. I would like to congratulate innovative industry, which tries to find solution to unmet needs. India is known for affordability at scale. What India does is make the medicines available to all the sections of the society and takes care of the cost of affordability. If we look around the world, number one issue is healthcare costs. In fact, healthcare costs today are around 10% around the world. In US, it is around 16%. Now, how do we make sure it is more than defense? How do we make sure that innovation is taken care of and the medicines are available? I will say in this US-India partnership is the starting point. What India can do is make affordable medicine and work towards with US in innovation and get innovation at scale. Indian government has been working on that agenda, and we announced BioShakti initiative recently, where we are talking of building 1,000 clinical trial centers. We are talking of recruiting 1,500 people for regulatory simplification. We are working on building the capability and capacity as far as overall factor is concerned. And biosimilars is biologicals is becoming a very important thing. 55 molecules are going out of patent, which will cost $300 billion. How we can get biosimilars to the US and further contribute to the saving. All of us are aware that India contributes $200 billion saving every year to US economy. 90% of generic cost only 13% to the US healthcare system. 10% cost 87%. How do we make it available? And we have got the saving of $1 trillion to US economy. Now India is getting into innovation space. And there are multiple announcements which have been made. And for our information to all global participants who are joining this seminar, 4 areas which are very, very important. One is funding for innovation. Government of India, in fact, is giving funds for innovation. Number of schemes have been announced for promoting innovation. Second is regulatory simplification and regulatory predictability, which Phil was talking about. In fact, we are trying to simplify. No trials are necessary to start the innovation in this country, which used to happen. Like if I want to begin innovation in this country, you have to go through multiple processes. We are digitalizing the total process. We are centralizing the overall capability and building the whole process. And we will see a lot of reforms taking place, those who are monitoring developments in India. In fact, regulatory system in India is aimed to be the benchmark in the world. We are talking of ICH registration in next 2 years' time, 5 to 6 years' time, PIC registration, which will get a lot of system advancement. So funding, regulatory simplification, and industry academic collaboration will become very, very important. We are seeing early signs in that area. In terms of vaccine, there were 6 different kind of vaccines which were developed in India in a year's time, and many of them were supplied to more than around 150 countries around the world. We have seen Glenmark coming with oncology product, which was licensed to AbbVie, big development in India. Sun Pharma buying Organon at $11.5 billion and getting the presence in all markets of the world. So it will lead to access and innovation. Zydus acquiring another company, oncology. So there will be M&A game, there will be a development game in India. And there will be CAR T cell therapy. Again, a lot of work which is being done is being marketed at $4,000 compared to $40,000 in the US. So what India and US have got a strong foundation of trade in the pharmaceutical business. US-India pharmaceutical partnership is natural because, and we have to also talk of resilience because healthcare supply chain, pharma supply chain is not as diversified. We depend upon one source for the supplies of the product. So it becomes very, very important that US-India work together in partnership to create a new ecosystem for healthcare, which is focused on patient innovation, affordability, and resilience. I will stop here and come back again.
Yeah. Thank you, Sudarshan ji. I think it's very heartening to hear about how India is going on the innovation side, and then this really great how Sun Pharma is spreading their footprint in the worldwide level, and Zydus working on a different way, and CAR T cell therapy, which is like a very important to have an innovation in this country. So it's good to see how this is like the kind of a regulatory reformation is on way, because I am the witness of these things, how the regulatory bodies are having a consultation between the US, India, and other industries, and then they are making all the things feasible. But still long way to go, because we have to showcase the world, and then that the India is also going on the innovation direction. It's really great to hear the things, since pharmaceuticals is always very uh, uh, interesting things to discuss about. And recently we have seen the lot of interest on the medical technology, because it is a kind of the medical devices are the nascent stage in this country. But I can see the future is very bright, and we have Aileen, and she is handling the company's medtech ecosystem in US and India. So Aileen, I think I'll go to you, and then I'll go back to the pharma, and then I'll make it something like that, so that we can have a all discussion. So Aileen, how do you see the future of medtech collaborations? Because there is a very rapid advancement in diagnostics, and there are a lot of AI-enabled devices and the digital health technologies are coming, where do you see the most promising opportunities of US-India collaboration in building the future of healthcare delivery? Because this is very important at this time, that the medical device should also be considered, because in pharma, there is a kind of a things on IP side, but in medical device, there is not much IP, but the rapid transition is going there and a lot of new technology are coming. How do you see the future of medtech?
Great. Thank you, Brajesh. First, I'd like to thank WIDA for organizing this event and inviting me. It's great to be here with you, Brajesh and Phil and Sudarshan. So I agree, the future is very bright for collaboration in medtech. Medical devices, we call medtech because it's basically almost all technology enabled. And there's so much happening, and what's really exciting is that there's so much potential to grow in the future. So just to provide a quick snapshot, among a subset of our global members, there's $1.2 billion invested in India right now. And that's across more than 35 sites for manufacturing, R&D, and GCC operations. And what's particularly notable is that some of our members tell us that their world's largest R&D centers are in India. So there's a lot happening right now, and that really draws on the strengths of the United States and India. So the U.S., of course, brings the innovation, keyword from the pharma industry as well, in AI-enabled devices. And then on the Indian side, you have the engineering talent, you have the scale, you have the digital infrastructure, and then also the cost-efficient healthcare delivery systems that India offers. So just for one example, as AI-enabled diagnostics innovate, they need to test the systems. And so India provides the world's largest real-world validation ecosystem with the people, so that you can test the diagnostics. And together, this accelerates the adoption on the global scale. So that's just one example, but there's so many things happening. I'm very excited to see what comes next.
Yeah, thanks, Aileen. I think this really good to hear about this medical technology advancement. Now going back to Phil, because where Phil was talking in the beginning about the effective predictability and the science-based innovation and the market access. Phil, as we know that India is doing very good in the supply chain and the regulatory predictability and all. But what I have a feeling, it's my personal views, because still we are not having a lot of innovative drug access in this country. And I just wanted to understand this from you regarding the regulatory predictability and the patient access, because still we are hoping that we'll have we should have all the innovative drug molecules in this country. So this innovation things are moving very faster than ever. And how important is the greater regulatory alignment and the predictability, which enable the patient access and more efficient innovative pathway? How do you see that, what India should do exactly on this regulatory things and for the patient access?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think going back to what I had touched on a little bit at the beginning is the importance of consistency and predictability in terms of policy and approach. And this applies to any government around the world or any policymaker around the world. I think from the perspective of our members, like I was saying, a lot of these decisions on production and discovery and distribution are rooted in not just a one year plan or outline, but in many years of investment and kind of building out of a network. And so that kind of predictability on the science side, particularly for regulators that regulate safety and efficacy. So in the US, like the FDA, ensuring that those guidances and that those processes are timely, efficient, and science-based is really an important factor. But and even beyond the the FDA regulators, there are other regulatory factors that also affect how a medicine, again, gets from the lab to your pharmacy. And that involves a lot of economic regulation in terms of how the distribution of the medicines are regulated and whether those are consistent. So, switching of policies or upending of different expectations are things that that slow things down, and as well as consistent decisions from legal or administrative decision-making bodies in terms of cases and controversies and disputes. It really is, I think similar to many other innovative industries, these sorts of things are important for an industry in order to be able to roll out something that often takes, like I said, may take up to 10 years. And I think that what we have seen in India is definitely motivation and an energy to begin to continue making these pathways more efficient. Uh, as Sudarshan was saying, that India is the largest supplier of generic medicines and vaccines globally. This is an incredible strength. Prime Minister Modi also said that uh, that his goal is to go from being pharmacy of the world to a hub of innovation, particularly for biosimilars. And we recognize that. We support that. We do think that a lot of the factors that I mentioned earlier are things that the U.S. and India can work on in order to make that a faster reality.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil. And I think you have touched all the important thing. And I'll move to Sudarshan ji because as you said that Prime Minister Modi was saying we have to be an innovation hub. So we left Sudarshan ji wherein we know that India is the country where we are providing to whole world the affordable medication and the solution. So how do you see this, how we can balance the affordability and the future innovation? Because we know this healthcare industry is facing a global pressure to improve affordability, while we have to think about the sustainability of innovation. How the industry and the government should work together to create the balanced, future-ready healthcare ecosystem, and your thought on this?
So thank you very much, Dr. Brajesh, and thank you, Phil, highlighting the very basic need of innovation. Yes, we have done a great job in affordability. Now what we are talking is innovation at scale. And the great advantage of India is our median age is 28 years. We have got 1.5 million engineers passing out. We have got 500,000 pharmacists passing out from the Indian academic institution. So we are doing a lot for upgrading the talent in this country and also working with the US, whoever can talk about us, to upgrade the talent. In fact, IPA is setting up an institute for development of talent in this country, and IPA companies have committed $50 million as far as that area is concerned. So talent is a very, very important part, and building talent, attracting the best talent is a very important part to take further the agenda of innovation. Secondly, as you talked about regulatory reforms in this country, I've been part of this industry for 50 years. I've worked in all global companies, and the way the environment is taking place, there's a lot of listening which is taking place by the government. In fact, the secretaries of Pharma and Health, they are deeply involved for regulatory simplification. And our regulatory system today should be, we are benchmarking with US, what we can do to further improve the system. Parallel activities can take place now. Form 27 form which were there, which have been deleted. So constantly we are thinking, can we create a one-stop destination for regulatory simplification, digitalization of the overall process. So there's a lot of things which are happening to get predictability, which is very important, Phil, what you talked about in case of building the innovation. In terms of patents, also what I would like to say, we are TRIPS compliant. And we have strengthened the patent system in simplifying the pre-grant position process. There is no Form 27 which is required as far as the overall system is concerned. We have built digitalization and patent centers, additional centers for patent appeals. So there is high degree of predictability which is being brought in the system. And wherever there are areas of improvement, there is constant discussion with stakeholders from global companies, Indian companies, all the leaders from the industry, and we are ready to listen to further take the agenda forward. Because what is important, yes, we are very good in affordable innovation, affordable thing, but we have to get to affordable innovation. The cost of developing a drug today is around $1.5 billion. It takes around 10 years time. With the use of AI and getting predictability in the system, can we reduce the cost? Can we bring the medicine faster? Can we work towards making unmet needs? And India and US can play a very important role. In fact, when Prime Minister Modi met President Trump, they announced a trust relationship, which is very, very important to take healthcare agenda forward. And US-India medicine partnership can be foundation to bring medicine to the world at an affordable cost, and finding solutions with the help of US, we can become partners for affordable innovation around the world.
Yeah, I think it's really good to see the kind of the system is going, and then government is very open to listen to the multinational or American companies, and then they are also trying to maintain the complete ecosystem so that there should not be any kind of a bias things, and this will go. So I'll go to Aileen, and it's very important question, and which is like regarding the technology-driven healthcare access, which we know the medical technology or medical device sector is in nascent stage, and still there is long way to go from the India sides, but a lot of the high-end, high-value technologies are there in US. How can the emerging technologies play a transformative role in the healthcare access? Because when we talk about the access, it's not only the tier 1 cities, but it's only tier 2 and tier 3 cities in India. How we can have the access for the patient so that they can be benefited by this high and high value medical device things, and particularly on the undeserved in the rural population, because India has a lot of rural population, and they are always lagging behind to avail the innovative technologies. What do you think about and how the government should take the initiative so that we can have all the devices in this country?
Sure. So this is like an incredible success story. And just to set the scene a little bit, for the past 15 or 20 years, there's been a mad rush to develop hospitals, clinics, healthcare facilities in the tier 2, 3 cities, and then also in the rural areas. Because previously people would travel for hours, if not days, for a routine medical appointment, which is obviously time consuming and expensive. And with the adoption of AI-enabled devices, for example, somebody can go to a mobile clinic in or near a village, get a scan done, have it sent to a doctor, and then have a diagnosis and a plan. And so this is really groundbreaking because it allows patients in rural areas to shift from a reactive medicine mode to a preventative medicine mode. And if it takes a day to get to a hospital, the likelihood of going in for a routine scan is very low. But if it's 15 minutes, or a reasonable distance, then people are going to go in for a preventative scan. So this is really groundbreaking. This also helps on the affordability issue to have it closer to the patient. And as Sudarshan mentioned, it's really taking a patient first approach, focusing on the patient safety. This helps affordability, simplicity, and this is just really groundbreaking. So, through these AI-enabled devices and telemedicine and getting, the digital infrastructure that I mentioned, huge host of patients are now able to have more robust medical care, and this is a great step.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear all of you, and I think I can go and on to ask many things but I just wanted to ask the organizers if we have time, I can go ahead and with the more questions, and otherwise because I can see that we have given a 40 minutes time, so that's the thing. It's really a great conversation and then understanding from the field that how we can think about the predictability and the RDP and how we can make the framework so that the innovation can come to this country. And in the same time, we have to think for the affordability solution, as Sudarshan you mentioned. This is very important. Everyone should get the affordable solution in terms of the pharma and the advancement in the medical technology. That's really great. Things are happening in the current scenario, and we would want more and more innovation should come in this country, and then we go. I think we are on the time, and I would like to thank you all for your time and really a great discussion. And I'll go to Diego.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barse, and all of our panelists for a really insightful discussion. I think the conversation really highlighted not only the importance of healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and biopharma and the US-India economic relationship, but also how these sectors increasingly intersect with broader questions around supply chain resiliency, innovation, manufacturing, and economic security as well. Thank you for joining us this evening, Dr. Barse and Sudarshan. Thank you for joining us this morning, Phil and Aileen, and great to have you on all for the first time on the WIDA platform. And so
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. And so with that, I'd like to now turn to our next panel, moderated by Manaz Khan. And as we all know, as governments and companies around the world think about the future of advanced manufacturing, clean energy technologies, semiconductors, strategic supply chains, critical minerals have quickly become central to the trade and geopolitical conversations around the world. And also increasingly important, it's an area of cooperation between the United States and India. And so with that, I'd like to welcome on screen now Siddharth Aryan, Senior Director of Energy and Infrastructure at the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Pradeep Karuturi, apologies for that. I'm learning this. This seminar is teaching me how to pronounce some names from India, so you got to bear with me. But you're the Director of Energy and Environment Infrastructure at the US-India Business Council. Ambassador Jeff Pyatt, Senior Managing Director of Critical Minerals and Energy at McLarty Associates and former Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources. And Manaz Khan, Vice President of Policy, Critical Supply Chains at Silverado Policy Accelerator and former Director for South Asia at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. Thank you all for joining us. And Manaz, over to you.
Thank you, Diego. I always know how hard Indian names are. As Diego stated, my name is Manaz Khan. I am the Vice President of Policy for Critical Supply Chains at Silverado Policy Accelerator. We're a geopolitical think tank deeply engaged in the critical minerals arena. So I've worked with the number of organizations and people that are on this panel, and I can testify that they are the experts in this space. So I'm delighted to welcome Ambassador Jeff Pyatt. He is the Senior Managing Director of Critical Minerals and Energy at McLarty. And you may know him as also the former Assistant Secretary of Energy for Energy Resources at the State Department under the Biden administration. Also with us to give us the business lens is Pradeep Karuturi, who's the Director of Energy, Environment and Infrastructure at the US-India Business Council, which is a part of the US Chamber of Commerce, and they've done work on critical minerals, not just in India, but worldwide. and a good friend, Sid Aryan, who is the Senior Director of Energy Infrastructure at the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum. And he is our partner on these issues with us at Silverado. So I want to give some framing remarks before we begin, because a lot's happened in the last couple of years when it comes to critical minerals with respect to India and the US. And the door really opened for deeper critical minerals collaboration between the two countries in June 2023, when Prime Minister Modi visited the United States. That was under then President Biden, and they signed off on the Mineral Security Partnership. Since then, and now under the new leadership, under President Trump, we saw Prime Minister Modi visiting again just 2 years later in February 2025. And the Strategic Mineral Recovery Initiative was announced during that visit. And that was a new US-India program to recover and process critical minerals, including lithium, cobalt, and rare earths from heavy industries like aluminum, coal mining, and oil and gas. We also see India as part of many US and multilateral initiatives, including FORGE, which is the successor to the Mineral Security Partnership. We also see that India has signed off on the Pax Silica Declaration in February 2026, just a few months ago. India also endorsed the G7 Critical Minerals Action Plan in June 2025 and is part of the Quad Mineral Initiative that was announced last summer. And with Secretary Rubio's trip to India in the next few days, we'll see that front and center. We also see that more hasn't been done right now on critical minerals bilaterally because of the trade relationship. So we'll see where that goes, and happy to explore that with our panelists. I also truly believe that US and India can be a geopolitical hedge against China on critical minerals, given their two great economies. And so we'll explore that angle as well. So Ambassador Pyatt, I want to start with you. You were deeply involved in the Mineral Security Partnership and on these issues at the State Department, and now you have a new lens in the private sector. So looking back at your tenure in the State Department, how do you think that India fits into America's broader critical mineral strategy? And where can the bilateral relationship make genuine progress? And where do you think it currently falls short?
Great. Thanks, Manaz. Really delighted to have this conversation. And I think in some ways, your nice introduction left out the most important part of my biography for this discussion, which is that I'm an India lifer. Served first at the embassy in Delhi in 1992, so 34 years ago. And it's relevant because when I became assistant secretary, my first trip back to Delhi as assistant secretary was in February of 2023. Had a lot of discussions, went to the foreign ministry to see my friends there. And I was actually quite surprised because one of the questions I got from the South Bloc team was, why wasn't India invited to be a founding member of the Mineral Security Partnership? And this, I was sort of gobsmacked by this because traditionally India has not been the demandeur as we work together on multilateral issues. As you and everybody on this panel know very well, India has been historically aloof in terms of how it associates itself with US foreign policy priorities. And here was the Indian government saying, we want to be part of the club. And what was most striking about the conversations on that trip to me, aside from the strong demand signal from the Indian side, was how absolutely clear Delhi was on the goals that we were trying to achieve through the Mineral Security Partnership, which was set up to solve for two problems. One was how to rapidly reduce our exposure to China as the key source of supply and processing for so many of the energy minerals that we needed, but also how to deliver the greatly increased volumes that we need to meet our energy and energy transition goals. So China was very much front and center as we began this conversation. I came back to Washington and started to advocate for bringing India in. MSP was a new multilateral partnership at that stage, and as anybody who's done multilateral diplomacy knows, it's sometimes just a lot of effort to build consensus. I give great credit to this on this issue to Kurt Campbell, who was the Deputy National Security Advisor in those days. And Kurt was my co-conspirator in pushing the interagency and pushing our partners much faster than they intended to bring India in, because there's an assumption that India is always going to be a difficult partner because our two bureaucracies are complex, because Indian democracy, like American democracy, has a variety of forces involved. So as you say, we brought India in June of 2023. And I think one of the real stories here is how effective of a partner India became very quickly. I give a lot of credit to the Secretary Mines from that period, K.L. Kanta Rao. Also shout out to many, many partners in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but especially Supriya Raghunathan, who in those days was the DCM here in Washington and is now as a secretary in the Foreign Ministry, and was very, very helpful, I think, in both focusing Indian policy, but also helping us to think not only about how we work together in the MSP framework, but also the specific capabilities that India can bring to bear. For instance, in East Africa, a region that has been a priority for critical mineral supply chain development, where the United States doesn't have nearly the history or the access that the Indian government and Indian companies enjoy. And then maybe the last observation to make as we start the conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Pradeep and Sid on this. You know, one of the things that's striking to me is, having spent a lot of time on these issues and thinking about them globally on the private sector side, I still stumble across Indian companies every month or two who have a big platform on these issues. And I ask, how come I haven't heard of this company before? There's Epsilon in the graphite space, Lohum in recycling, Greenco, one of the big hydrogen fuel cell developers. And all of these companies are, like the rest of Indian industry, starting to think more globally, looking at opportunities both to develop Indian resources, but also to invest here in the United States and to develop third markets where American companies are sometimes reluctant to engage, but where Indian companies are comfortable being expeditionary and working in business environments that are sometimes complex and difficult to navigate. So looking forward to the conversation, and especially pleased that WIDA has put a spotlight on this topic, which for me is of fundamental importance, both to how we manage the conflicts in the US-India trade relationship and build a positive agenda, which I've devoted much of my professional life to, but also in terms of how we solve for the global problems that China confronts us with.
Thank you, Ambassador Pai. That's a great segue to our next question when we're talking about businesses and bringing this down from the policy or the diplomatic level into the boardroom. You know, and my personal experience is there's been a lot of hesitancy around what we can do together. So Pradeep, I want to turn it over to you. From your vantage point at the US-India Business Council, and you've interacted with many different companies, what are US businesses actually experiencing, or Indian businesses actually experiencing on the ground when it comes to the critical mineral sector today in terms of cross collaboration? And can you also walk us through the Indian policy reforms, of which there's been many over the last couple of years? How have these policy reforms created real commercial openings for US businesses? And are there still any barriers there?
Yeah, thanks, Manhaz. Fascinating discussion. It's always a pleasure to listen to Ambassador Payat. I mean, we at USIBC, are closely tracking these developments on the critical mineral space. I mean, sitting in Delhi, I can tell you the amount of work that's going in India on critical minerals is fascinating over the last few years. There were times where even lithium couldn't be touched by private sector in India or even for any other country, but now India has opened up critical minerals like lithium. Any private sector can come into it, and now India has also allowed 100% FDI in terms of exploration at the junior mining stage. So there are good amount of reforms that the current government is doing, and I mean there are some results as well. I was just in a critical minerals conference by the Ministry of Mines, and the secretary was highlighting some key developments. So the last 10 years, the average number that goes for auction is 22 blocks goes for auctions average in India. But in the last 1 year, it was 212. So almost a 10x growth in terms of the number of blocks that went to auction. It's not just about auction. Even if you look at the operational data, just last year, there are 56 mines that got operationalized. Like there are a mix of greenfield and brownfield. And in the last overall decade, it's just around 60 numbers. So this fascinating developments and a lot of coordination happening both at the center and the state level. And I'm getting a feeling that government has identified the niche areas where they need to focus rather than going into the entire value chain. Government is now focusing heavily on the midstream. They're planning to bring in a couple of policies on lithium and nickel, and there's a lot of stakeholder consultations. I believe US companies are also involved in those consultations to build lithium processing parks in India. And they've also identified certain states like Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Gujarat, where they want to build an integrated processing park rather than going after every state in India. And in fact, now government is bringing a unified mining portal this year. So which means if a foreign investor from the US wants to get into India, you need not go to every state for understanding what's the mining permissions and also you can actually go to one single portal. It will be uniformed across the state. So that's one big reform government is planning to bring. I mean, these all sounds great, but I feel in terms of barriers, there are a lot to do, especially on the offshores. I mean, when I say offshore, I mean like minerals like lithium. India doesn't have those, so we really need to move the needle in terms of getting those upstream sorted for these critical minerals. Yes, you're building the processing, but how are you going to secure the spodumene or this? We need government support. Government should work with the industry, handhold with the industry. I think that's where even for the US companies to come to India for the lithium processing, facilities that's going to come up in the next few months. I think hand-holding the upstream, and also even if you build a processing park, who's going to ensure the offtake, right? Who's going to take a pre-cam material and all of that. I think really looking at the post and the upstream, we missed that in the gigafactories. India has announced that we will have a 50 gigawatt of battery capacity by 2025. We're hardly at 2 gigawatt hours. So, I mean, India has learned, I feel. So we shouldn't do a similar mistake in terms of this lithium processing park. So we should look at how do we secure the upstream and also look at how can we link US or can we work with the US companies for an offtake for the pre-cam? So this is one area that I feel we should look at. And another interesting development is on the rare earths. There are 4 rare earth corridors India is coming up. It's a common issue for both for US. In India, we have low grade, lighter rare earth materials, but we are working on the magnet facilities. So government is building a rare earth magnet facilities in the next 2 years. Again, the challenge is the technology. Yes, you have oxide, but how do you convert the oxide to metal, metal to magnet? I think that's a common puzzle for the US. US has also started working on the magnet technologies. I feel those are some areas where Indian and US companies can come together. Lots happening, but I feel this government in India is really passionate on critical minerals. They're ready to bring reforms. And I think US has a lot of potential to work with the current administration. I'll pause there. Thank you.
That's a great on the ground summary of everything going on in that space. So I'm going to turn it over to Sid. Sid, we've done a lot together on this issue, both here and in India. And USISPF sits at the intersection of policy and private sector engagement. And I know we did recommendations a couple of years ago. So could you walk us through some of those recommendations and how the conversation has evolved since then? And where do you see momentum and where do you see governments or industry falling short in this space?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Manaz, and thank you, Vita, for having me here. Great to share the platform with Ambassador Payat, who we started working with 2 years ago. But first of all, thank you, Manaz. Thank you for the partnership and collaboration over the past 2 years. So this work has really been a joint effort between USISPF and Silverado. And I think this partnership is a model of how the private sector can move the needle on an issue that governments alone cannot resolve. When we started working on this issue, the US-India critical minerals conversation was mostly diplomatic. What USISPF and Silverado set out to do was to ground this conversation into business reality. What do companies actually need and where are they stuck and how can we help? So from our past work, we put out 6 concrete recommendations. And in fact, that roundtable was with Ambassador Pyatt in our office in DC. So the first recommendation was a government-supported trade mission to India, because the most immediate barrier that we saw was not lack of interest or capital, but lack of understanding. US companies and banks had limited visibility into India's mineral endowment, the auction framework, and permitting environment. Second, we recommended USTDA-led feasibility studies for graphite and manganese, 2 minerals where US is heavily import reliant and India has real production capacity that frankly isn't being leveraged. Third, a market intelligence report between the Geological Survey of India and the US Geological Survey that could help, that was more investor facing and could help with bankability of projects. Talking about bankability, we spoke with DFC, Exim Bank for dedicated financing for graphite and manganese facilities in India. Technical assistance for environmental standards, and lastly, R&D to reduce lithium and cobalt dependence in EV batteries. So these were the recommendations that we've been working on for the last 2 years. We've gained significant momentum with companies on both sides, but we still believe that the biggest gap here is that of awareness. Like Pradeep highlighted, the Indian auction program has made real progress. I mean, there are real companies that are investing serious capital like Vedanta, JSW, Reliance, Epsilon Carbon, Lohum, Kabil, India's national critical mineral company, state-owned, is acquiring assets globally in Argentina, Australia, and Chile. So we think US and India, there's that framework, that's a formal framework still that's missing. And the more we have the private sector engage with each other from both sides, the more progress we can make.
That's excellent. Speaking of frameworks, I want to talk about one framework that is a favorite of mine, but has mixed feelings, and that one is the Quad. So Secretary Rubio is visiting New Delhi this week in just a couple of days for both bilateral talks and for the Quad foreign ministers meeting. And he stated that critical minerals will be on the agenda there. And as I stated before, there's a Quad mineral initiative that was announced back in July last summer. So I want to get your thoughts. I'm going to start with you, Ambassador Pyatt, on what we can do within the Quad. Do you think it's the right framework? We also have these plurilaterals that have been announced, but there's been no action plan bilaterally between US and India. And do you think that the Quad can actually deliver on critical minerals, and what would India's role be in that framework?
Great. Thanks, Manaz. And again, this is a real softball for me because my history with the Quad goes back to the East Asian tsunami in the early 2000s, which is really when we began cooperation in the US, Japan, India framework. And then as PDAS in the South and Central Asia Bureau was glad to support then Assistant Secretary Kurt Campbell when we created the Quad as a coordination mechanism. And I think, it's throughout its history, the Quad has always started with a strategic logic. And then the question is, how do you build substance behind that? And for me, using critical minerals as one of the priority areas to put substance into the Quad is a no-brainer, because you have the combination of Japan as an industrial superpower, highly import dependent, Australia with a globally significant industry and unmatched geology, the United States with the combination of capital formation, demand, and subsurface potential, and then India, which has a particularly important role, as Sid alluded to, in helping to fill some of the midstream and to attack one of the fundamental problems in making progress against China, which is how do you find a price point that is at least competitive in the ballpark of China. So, Kurt used to say that the division between the Quad countries was the cricket countries and the baseball countries. And that there's a little bit of a logic to that, but there's also a logic of the offtake countries, Japan and the United States, especially, and increasingly India, and the producer and processor countries. And so short answer is yes. I'm excited to see what Secretary Rubio comes home with, and maybe also on the institutional framework. I think one of the issues that I hope that Secretary Rubio will talk a little bit about is what began under Jake Sullivan's leadership with the ISET framework, because as both Pradeep and Sid said, there's also great potential for us to do more together on research. And this is an area where India has fantastic capabilities. As I used to say when I was in government, we can't dig our way out of the China dependency problem. We have to innovate. And India is an obvious partner, again, because of its mass, but also the technological capabilities that India has in its research institutions and universities.
Yeah, I agree, Jeff. I don't think we're leveraging their workforce and their brilliance as much as we can, especially with the Indian students both here and abroad. So wanted to see Pradeep or Sid if you had any thoughts on the Quad. Pradeep, I'll start with you.
So we at USIBC supported a delegation from Japan last year on batteries. I mean, one common project that I'm hearing where there is some synergy is around the rare earth magnets. Australia has the upstream in terms of rare earths. Of course, India has, but the quality of Australia is relatively better. Technology, oxide to metal, metal to magnet, Japan has the technology. But I feel like US can come with the capital and India can be one of those China plus one strategy in terms of a magnet facility. So we are hearing there is a lot of interest from Japan for the current rare earth magnet scheme in India to be part of that scheme. I feel that is one project. And the other project that I'm looking is around the R&D for new age battery chemistries. Yes, we have lithium, but what about the next battery chemistry? So I feel the technology is where Japan and India has so much of talent pool. So in terms of really bringing that price parity, because you can build all the technologies, but if it doesn't compete on the price on the international markets, it may not help. So I think these are some of the areas that we are identifying and closely tracking. And hopefully in this rare earth magnet scheme, we might see some collaboration is what we are tracking. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Sid, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just add to Ambassador Payat and Pradeep, the question of capital. Quad could be very useful if we can formalize a co-investment framework specifically for critical minerals, pooling capital from US, Australia, Japan, India to invest in mining assets in third countries. Our friend, Assistant Secretary Fannin at Orion is doing something similar. We should join forces because that will really help move the needle on supply chain resiliency.
Yeah, I agree, Sid. I think that like an Orion type of fund would be great, just limited to investor Quad investments, whether it's in the Quad or abroad, because there is a lot coming out of Exim Bank and DFC at the moment. And if there's some sort of sovereign wealth fund, JOGMEC also does a lot on the capital side. So they're a very willing partner to invest here and abroad within those countries, and always focus on specific minerals that are important to Quad partners as well. For those that are online, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'd be happy to weave them into our discussion. One of the other, since this is a trade policy discussion, one of the other points that I do want to touch on is the bilateral side. We are seeing these trade negotiations that are ongoing. We've heard over the last 2 days the status of those trade negotiations, and we're seeing, a lot of the very kind of traditional chapters, whether that's, agriculture or technology, governance, kind of creep in there, but we're not hearing a lot on critical minerals, and there has been no announcement after the critical minerals ministerial on some sort of action plan between the United States and India, even though we have one with Japan, Mexico, and the EU at the moment. So what do you think is the most realistic path forward? Should critical minerals be embedded into this ongoing trade agreement? Should there be an annex? Or should there be a separate action plan? I mean, what's feasible? What's most likely from the trade policy side? Because I do think trade policy helps bring that business certainty that partnerships sometimes cannot, because we see the changing of partnerships with administrations. So, Ambassador Pyatt, I want to get your thoughts on
Great.
that.
Thanks, Manaz. And first, I want to really commend you and the Silverado team for the input that you provided to USTR as part of their request for information on exactly this issue, how to think about trade policy in the context of critical mineral supply chains. This is one of the changes, frankly, from the Biden administration. I mean, USTR was not front and center in our toolkit the way some of the other parts of the US government were. That's obviously changed, but it's also a learning exercise for friends at USTR. And so from that perspective, in my view, it's a no-brainer to put this issue into the negotiating framework, in part because it has such a strong win-win aspect to it. We ought to be talking about preferential market access. That was one of the things that was front and center in the Biden approach, leveraging the critical minerals agreements under the IRA. And for better or worse, whatever you think about the IRA, that became a driver of investment decisions by countries that were looking to leverage the market preferences that the IRA provided. So we ought to be working on preferential market access as part of our recipe for collaboration with India. We ought to look at investment facilitation. Pradeep talked about some of the changes that have come under Indian regulations, and the barriers to entry in the Indian market are a real thing. But this is an obvious area where we have a shared interest in seeing past our respective protection agendas. And I think one of the things that's changed in the Trump administration's approach over the past few months has been a much more stronger focus on international collaboration. In the first year of the administration, there was a sort of very strong priority on projects domestically in the United States. But I think as you see the posture that has been carved out by John Yovanovitch at XM, by Secretary Rubio with the critical minerals ministerial, with what DFC is doing, there's a strong recognition that we're not going to solve this problem in the United States based only on production and processing here at home. I think harmonizing incentives, and I'm glad we touched briefly on the capital formation side, but it's important to recognize Trump administration is putting billions of dollars against this problem through OSC, through XM, through DFC, but the Indian government is also spending money. We should be looking, and I'm very encouraged when I hear Ben Black or Connor or others at DFC talking about the priority on crowding in finance from other partners. In my mind, the ideal critical minerals project is one where DFC is investing, JOGMEC is investing, the Indian government is investing probably through the foreign ministry, and Australia is investing through its DFAT resources. So I think joint financing is also part of this story as well. And then maybe the last observation to make on the trade policy side, I think one of the real downsides from the prolonged freeze in our trade partnership with India and resolving these issues is I don't see how the United States and the Trump administration solves globally for the China +1 problem without the strongest possible relationship with India. And I think we have an open door. We have to understand the challenges created by India's democracy and India's federal system, just as US democracy and our federal system creates negotiating barriers. But I hope desperately that those in USTR, Brendan and others who've been pushing for an agreement, will be successful in getting this across the line, because I think there is a significant opportunity cost from the failure to reach closure on this. And as I said, critical minerals should be a catalyst to agreement.
Yeah, and it's one of the areas where you can get collaboration much more easily than on other provisions. So same question to you and Pradeep. Let's say there is a US-India Critical Minerals Action Plan, or there is a trade agreement. Pradeep and Sid, I'll start with you, Pradeep. What would be the 2-3 areas that you would like to see in that kind of action plan between the US and India?
Yeah, I mean, as Sid mentioned previously, one area that we are tracking is on the R&D side of things. India has huge pool of secondary resources, be it like red mud or like, because of the coal and all of this, coal seam, there's so many secondary resources. Where are the traces of rare earths? But the challenge is in terms of the technology to extract this critical minerals. So, I mean, this is an area like, we hosted the NLR lab recently in our office in Delhi. And that was a conversation that we felt like, it is collaborating between a lot of synergy between the US and India, not just from the lab to lab, but also from the industry and lab coming together on the R&D from secondary sources. Like there are sources like seaweed also, like, where you can extract rare earths. So I think that's one area of collaboration. The other area that, as I said earlier, also is around the rare earth side of things. Yes, you both have rare earth oxide. Yes, India is from beach sand, but US mountain pass. But how do we go next level to the downstream of producing magnets? So can India be one of the China plus one strategy to have a magnet facility in India? Because India has huge downstream demand center, and India is looking for the technology and also collaboration from different partners. The third stream, as I said, is earlier is on the processing midstream. Like, yes, India is bringing a processing incentive scheme. Can US come together in filling the gap on the upstream side of things, like, on getting this lithium hard rock like spodumene and like, financing through DFC or an EXIM and going back, like, can you take that pre-cam material back to the US to build the gigafactories? So we are trying to see connect dots through this midstream R&D and rare earth magnet. These are areas that we feel are emerging quickly between both countries. Yeah, thank you.
So same question, and if you can also focus on the recycling piece, I think that's one that we haven't touched on yet.
Absolutely. So just to add to on the first question, to add to what Ambassador Payat and Pradeep said, and Pradeep focused more on the difficult pieces, but one of the easier ones that we see, which has an immediate business impact, is synthetic graphite. That material is used for oil and gas applications, is used for battery applications. Both countries are heavily reliant on imports. So that's one area that if we can carve out special attention to within the trade policy piece, can resolve a lot of these supply chain issues. On the recycling bit, India has started to become a global recycling hub with companies like Lohum that was mentioned by Ambassador Payat earlier, have gained significant capacities and now they're entering into mining and processing. We in India, we collect a lot of waste, electronic waste. People also don't necessarily change their iPhone every year. So if India can make it easy for Lohum and companies like Lohum to import e-waste from other countries, again, that's a trade bottleneck or a trade policy bottleneck right now. And with their capacity building and processing, India could really become a hub and solve a lot of these problems.
Yeah, I agree. We have a question in the last 5 minutes from online. Our question is, can't these problems of securing reliable access to critical minerals be achieved through stockpiling or diversifying sources of supply or agreements with mining investors to buy a proportion of their output at a specific price, or non-WTO prohibit subsidies for domestic mining operations or processing operations without the need to create tariff clubs? So I can start on that real quick on the stockpiling and diversifying sources of supply. Just When it comes to both US and India, it's difficult to do because a lot of these critical minerals are still being sourced from China. So it's hard to stockpile something that China is not letting go of. And we've seen so many export controls, especially with the rare earths piece, and President Xi and Trump just met, and the piece about the rare earths and coming to an agreement on the rare earths was left out of the Chinese statement, even though it was in the White House statement. So we're not seeing the same collaboration there, but wanted to get your thoughts on that, on stockpiling and diversifying the sources, and having these subsidies without tariff clubs and trying to get these off takes. Ambassador Pyle, I'll start with you if you have any thoughts.
Thanks, Manaz. I mean, we've talked about this a lot and we'll keep talking about it, but I think the most important principle to bear in mind is, one, there's no easy button. There is no single lever that's going to solve this problem. It's going to take consistent effort over multiple administrations. When I was Assistant Secretary, I always talked about how important the work that my predecessor, Frank Fannin, did was to getting us to the point where we could at least start building an international partnership. I wish Caleb Moore and Jacob Helberg the best in their efforts, and nothing that they do over the next 3 years is going to solve the problem either. So the next administration has to pick up the effort. I'm hugely supportive, therefore, of what Congress has been doing. For instance, what Representative Young Kim and Ami Bera have been doing with the Dominance Act. And I should note that Ranking Member Bera is also a leader in the US-India caucus. So I know he is sympathetic to all of these issues. If any of his staff are listening, I hope that there will be an HVAC hearing on India and critical minerals at some point in the near future, because it's that kind of pressure from the Hill that can help. And then finally, on the specific question that was posed in the chat about tariff clubs, it's been really interesting for me to watch the evolution of Ambassador Greer's positioning on this. And he's recently talked about the importance of tackling the price question. We are not going to meet the China price based solely on innovation and international partnerships. And so I think we need to figure out how to send the price signal from off-takers to the market, which will incentivize the increased investments that are going to be necessary in order to solve the geopolitical problem of China's market dominance. But that geopolitical problem arose because of 20 years of inattention by the US government and our European partners in India and Japan and many others. Japan was probably the first to the party. And it's going to take 20 years for us to solve for it. But as you say, when I was in government, I always used to make the point that President Xi and the PRC were wrote the strongest talking points in favor of making the investment and building the partnerships that we would need to diversify. Because in fact, it's China's weaponization of its resources, and which began with the 3 Gs in the Biden administration and accelerated last April dramatically with China's controls in response to the Liberation Day tariffs. And so we all need to be very clear, China will never be a reliable supplier, and so we're going to have to invest to build the alternative channels.
Yeah, and I think we see that problem also with China investing in other countries, obviously not India, but they tend to bring the full package, whether that's investment in mining, a lot of capital into mining, sometimes in the downstream processing, the infrastructure, the offtake. So it's very hard to say no to China when it comes to these developing country partners. But I want to hand it over to Pradeep for any last thoughts in our next few minutes, and then to Sid.
No, I just wanted to reiterate, yes, synthetic graphite, US and India are already collaborating on the needle coke. India is getting the needle coke from US refineries, and India is producing graphite, and it is going back to US, for the steel industry and others. So there's definitely low-hanging fruit, which is already happening. But on this question, on this reliability, I feel like where India is missing is in terms of the intensity and the amount of risk taking on upstream. I don't think so. The risk is enough from Indian in government. I think they should go. The Indian PSUs are heavy in terms of cash flows and all. I think really they need to come forward in getting that upstream investments, like be it Coal India and others in foreign countries. Like, yes, we have done so much of announcement with Australia and Chile and Latin America, but what is missing is a reliable like assurance for midstream players that yes, for the next 10 years, India has secured this amount of lithium with clarity. We don't have that data and assurance. I think that if that can be done with few critical minerals, yes, we have 25 minerals in common. Can we work with 2 or 3 critical minerals to start with and give that assurance to industry through this long-term purchase agreements or with industry and PSUs? I think that might help a lot. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pradeep. And Sid, I'll give you the last word to close it off on any last thoughts.
Manoj, you are the expert here, and it'll be a miss if we don't hear from you. So over to you for your last word.
Yeah, well, I think this is an area where we're all 4 of our organizations need to do a lot of work in. I think that there is, real hesitancy. I talk to businesses all the time on this, real hesitancy about simple things, that not knowing the market, not knowing where to interject, not knowing who the players are in the Indian government, not knowing the policies. So if we can bring that education and put the pieces together, whether that's in a more partnership context at the State Department and hopefully in a trade agreement, I think that we will, make real progress and progress that lasts beyond administrations on both the bilateral and multilateral approach, which our 2 countries are involved in. So I'm going to hand it back over to Diego. And thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today from both the United States and India. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Manoj, and all of our panelists for helping us better understand what is a rapidly evolving landscape surrounding critical minerals. And it sets us up very nicely for our next session that we're going to talk about semiconductors and emerging technologies. But before I let you all go, Sid, I want to give you a special thanks to you and the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum, and Pradeep, to you and the U.S.-India Business Council at the Chamber of Commerce for your partnership and support in helping us shape this seminar. Sharing it with your extensive networks, it really helps us put a big spotlight on India, and especially as we try to amplify our reach around the world. And of course, Manoj and Ambassador Pyatt, thank you for joining us today. Both Silverado and McLarty Associates have been longtime WIDA supporters that enable us to put on programs like this and highlight different countries and regions around the world. So thank you again for joining us. And with that, I will turn us over to our final panel. I'd like to ask our speakers to please turn on their cameras. All right. And with that, one of the themes that we've seen consistently coming through, yesterday we set it up nicely with a session on digital trade. We just continued the conversation on critical minerals, and it's given us the framework and background that we need for this next conversation, where we'll look at AI, semiconductors, and emerging technologies shaping the future of U.S.-India trade relations and the global economy as well, more broadly. So with that, I'd like to welcome on Vikram Magul, Senior Vice President and Global Head of Engineering for Networks, Communication, Media, and Technology at Infosys. Dipakshi Menandru, Director of India Government Affairs at Intel. Arvind Pai, Founder and Managing Partner, Creative Insights. And Nigel Corey, good to have you back, Nigel. He's the Director of Digital Trade Technology and Technology Policy at Crowell Global Advisors. So if anything, I've learned a lot on U.S.-India trade relations, the issues that are at the forefront, and also I am learning better to pronounce some Indian last names and names. So thank you all. And with that, Nigel, over to you.
All right, thanks, Diego. Firstly, good morning, good evening to everyone here online. First, thanks to Ken and Diego and WIDA for the opportunity to bring us together to round out what I presume has been an interesting few days covering the landscape of trade and tech and other issues with the US and India and others. As Diego mentioned, my name's Nigel Corey. I am the Director for Trade, Technology and Digital at Kroll Global Advisors, a global advisory firm. We hope this session will be able to help us all explore and better understand US-India cooperation on AI and advanced technologies, the semiconductor supply chains and manufacturing, industrial policy, national security, and tech governance. All the good things. And to cover recent announcements and recent initiatives. And I think this panel is well placed to help us all come out the other end with a better understanding of what's going on, of which there's a lot. Given there's the India AI mission with the compute build out, there's the India's semiconductor manufacturing ramp, there's obviously the new US-India interim trade agreement, there's also the pre-existing transforming the relationship utilizing strategic technology, the Trust Initiative, plus Pax Silica. And all of this comes after obviously India hosting the India AI Impact Summit, which my colleagues and I had the great fortunate to be able to attend and just see India's vision and actions around all things AI. And so today we're lucky in that we've got 3 speakers that can cover the landscape on all these issues in terms of an industry engineering view, a chip making policy view, and investor deep tech sort of policy view. So please, we'll get into it, and I'll start with Vikram from Infosys. Great to have you here today. I mean, you
Thanks,
and
Nigel.
Infosys are really well positioned to talk about what's going on. Infosys has a visibility across both sides of the US-India AI build-out, from hyperscalers, enterprise clients, and across the verticals with telcos, media, communications, and tech, where there's obviously real demand for AI infrastructure investment in India right now. Where do you think, how is all this going? How is the AI infrastructure build out going? And where is it, do you think, running into friction that both the US and Indian governments will have to sort of deal with at some point?
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. I think from a vantage point, demand has clearly moved from experimentation to outcome-linked AI transformation across the industry landscape, right? Just to look at semicon, and I'm sure we'll cover that in more detail. India was always known for a design hub. Now we are building the entire ecosystem for manufacturing and post-manufacturing processing, right? And that will ensure that you can innovate faster. You can innovate right at the core of new products, new technologies. But if you look at the diffusion of where AI is impacting different industries, the first one I would like to talk about is telecom and networks, right? So telcos are leading the charge on AI infrastructure localization. Indian carriers are investing in edge data centers, GPU clusters to serve 5G and network AI use cases, especially autonomous networks, real-time analytics, security, posture rectification, etc., are things that are leading to the AI buildup. And this demand surge is pulling global hyperscalers to expand Indian cloud capacity as well. And that's why we see announcements from Microsoft, Google in new large AI-ready data centers within the country. The second area to look at is the media and tech platforms. Media and content companies are ramping up AI compute for streaming optimization and generative content tools, while global tech firms see India as a prime location for AI operations, right? And that's again leading to hyperscalers and cloud vendors bringing state-of-the-art GPUs to the India market, right? And that's leading to a lot of growth as well. But there is another interesting area that we are seeing, and that is the global capability scaling, what we call as the GCCs in India, which are actually leading the charge for building new technology, AI-led technology for the global market. So while we talk about the local consumption, there is a lot of new products, new platforms being created for the global consumption. And these are being led by multinational GCCs coming up in India. So that's really driving the AI consumption requirement, and it's moving very rapidly from experimentation to huge scale out. Now, if you look at the friction that exists to succeed in these areas, a lot of these bottlenecks that we face can't be solved by technology or engineering alone, right? They need support from other areas. Obviously, power and real estate remains a big bottleneck. High density AI data centers need
abundance both of power and land. And in India's large metros, there is constraints on how you can build this. There are long and ambiguous permitting processes at times, which actually consume a lot of time in getting this done. The second is the hardware supply chain and import hurdles. You mentioned a few things that have happened in the last few months that has eased some of these import duties and specialized licensing needs that were in place, but that still remains a concern, and that still remains an area that needs to be improved on. The third is the also availability of specialized talent. So as we get into more, more deeper AI product and platform development, you really need talent which can build deeper models which are specific for different industries, and that talent needs to be developed. And we are looking at how to scale that talent using global partnerships, which can go deeper into building some of these models. Now, finally, I think, the ability of enterprises in absorbing AI at scale and ensuring that, they are able to push the ecosystem to build this capacity is what needs to be focused on.
That's a fantastic starting point. And I mean, it sort of just makes me think of how so many countries are reaching sort of growth constraints in terms of developing AI and deploying it and adopting it. But I mean, India is really uniquely placed given it already has a huge sort of services industry. It had pre-existing sort of frictions around land and energy and import export type arrangements, but all of this comes into clearer focus with the rapid rollout and development of AI. And so I think that's a great sort of starting point for us to dig into. Now to Dipakshi from Intel, great to have you. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. From Intel's perspective, how do you view sort of the semiconductor market in India at the moment? And putting it into bilateral context, where do you think the strategic levers, the tactical levers are for how the two sides can work more together on semiconductors, which has obviously been on the agenda for two sides for some years now, but just seems to grow in importance as time goes on?
Thank you. Thank you, Nigel, for the question. And thank you, Rita, for convening this group together. I'll build on to where Bikram left, right? And that is to say there is definitely an AI demand explosion in India, right? And there are a lot of macroeconomic factors that kind of play into that. One, India is the youngest country and the most populous country, which is also fairly, I would say, both digitally astute as well as English astute. And these factors really, really point to the explosion that we are really looking at. Use of AI, not just for consumption, but even transitioning the three broad sectors that contribute to our GDP: agriculture, industry, and more importantly, the IT services and services at large, right? When we look at the rapid AI adoption, the way I would, bucket that is up until now, or at least, the last 5 to 6 years, there's been a lot of conversation on manufacturing and making India the manufacturing hub, where we have very often spoken about China plus one. What you see, and this as a very evident shift in the last 2 to 3 years, is also the focus on scaling compute demand at a population scale level. So whether you look at the recent DPI, that is the Digital Public Infrastructure 2.0 vision that Niti Aayog launched, whether you look at the larger India AI Impact Summit that happened in February and the entire focus on diffusion of AI, so that it's not just clustered or it's not just concentrated in a few hands. A lot of that directly translates into a burgeoning demand for one, of course, the infrastructure, and downstream and upstream both ways. And that is where you also see silicon becomes a very key dependency there. The second very important part there also is that when we talk about the larger semicon mission, there's a lot of focus now on also creation. India has been a very big consumer of technology for a long time. And you would see a lot of policy shifts that are really coming in to nudge the citizens, the governments, the enterprises to create more from India, whether it is patents, whether it is designs, whether it is where the wealth would eventually come from, right? And that brings to the strategic nature of silicon and semiconductors, Nigel, to your question, as really the root of it all. When we look at the silicon root of trust, you can't really talk about silicon root of trust without linking it to hardware root of trust. And in the very same realm, today, and most of the countries today have ambitions on building sovereign technology stacks. And India is right up there when we talk about sovereign technology build-ups as well. But if you look at the semiconductor play in the country right now, it started off, it's green shoots, but for it to really build semiconductors at scale, it will take a couple of years. And that is where the US and India partnership really, really plays a role. Because most of the semiconductors, by the end of it, they are based, or at least the patents are based in the US. And that trust between the two, and just building onto the previous panel, right? That is where conversations such as trust, conversations such as Quad, which India is going to host in the coming week, they have a new dimension, because now it is not just about a strategic intent that you're speaking about. It's really about where that strategic intent can culminate into bilateral trade that both the countries can benefit from. To the third point that I will very quickly touch upon, and again, something that Vikram touched upon, is the key structural strengths that India has and how that really plays into the largest semiconductor landscape and ecosystem when we talk about the country, right? Today, India almost contributes to about 20% of design talent around the semiconductors globally. And the idea also is that while it is 20% on the value chain, it doesn't really get 20% out of the semiconductors value chain. It's pretty much the smile curve, right? Where there is a bulk of work that is happening, both pre-silicon and post-silicon validation. But it's just a delta when it comes to that mark on the value chain. And both the government, the industry, the academia, you see that resolve is really, really clear that you want to go deeper. You want to go down and you want to do something that is, I'll not say more meaningful, but something that is more impactful in terms of making your presence felt on the global value chain, right? So when you look at the AI talent vibrancy for that matter, as per the recent Stanford report, India is the third largest country when it comes to tech vibrancy. Now, where all of this really matters is, despite all these figures and factors going in favor of India, the penetration rate of infrastructure in the country continues to lag, and that's a reality. When we look at, let's say, the personal computer penetration or the data center penetration, in data center penetration, we are early single digits. In personal computers, we are barely at about 15, 16%. Now, with a young population, which is, and a country that is increasing its per capita GDP year on year, that does seem to be an area where the trade would bulge in, for lack of a better word. And that is where perhaps the concentration of compute infrastructure that is right now in tier 1 cities alone, for that matter, 4 cities actually house almost 90% of the critical compute infrastructure, you see that that is going to start to diffuse. And very quickly to wrap this off, to the larger US-India, and I would say the 3 key pivots, the way we look at it as Intel. The first one is really the trusted silicon corridor. So while there's a lot of conversation on trust, I don't think so globally there's one common definition of what trust really means. And that holds true not just for services, it holds true for platforms, it holds true for systems, and equally, it holds true right up until the silicon level, because the single points of failure, perhaps silicon, critical minerals, is where those single points of failure are. So it's an ideal friendshore, but at the same point in time, there are definitive synergies that the two countries can build on each other's. The second one really is around the compute democratization, because especially when you have limited penetration, it also means that it's a market that is waiting to explode. It is just that you need to figure out how you are sustainability aware, how you are ensuring that it's right technology in right hands of the right people. It is also technology that can go in and catalyze social impact, which again, DPI, that's the vision for DPI. And to just close that entire piece is the most common or the most definitive synergy between the two countries also is US is patent and tech heavy, India is talent and people heavy. And that kind of gives a very synergistic approach to these two conversations. I'll pause at that, Nigel.
No, that was a great tour de force. And it just, I mean, makes me realize like semiconductors and tech cooperation has long been on the agenda in the US and India, but obviously it just takes on a different order of magnitude given the global development of AI. And whoever can best solve the binding constraints stands to maximize their benefits and the role they can play globally. And India has so many structural advantages to do that, and in a partner with the United States has the synergies that you mentioned to together sort of address these respective binding constraints, and then together develop a more comprehensive, intertwined and trusted semi supply chain and ecosystem. And I mean, and it touches on an issue that we sort of indirectly tied on with Vikram in terms of identifying and addressing both short-term constraints to immediate development, as well as aligning them to medium and long-term sort of local manufacturing preferences, as there is with import-export restrictions around repairing GPUs and server trays, and India's evolving approach to export controls of AI chips and how that plays together, given they can help address immediate concerns, but as a part of a longer term plan, you can obviously look at how do you support manufacturing in some of these areas over the longer term. But so that was great. Moving along to Arvind from Creative Insights. From a different perspective, I mean, you've been involved in the Indian tech ecosystem for many decades, in deep tech, in semiconductors, electronics and computing. But I mean, as it relates to India's evolving role in the semiconductor supply chain, where do you think India is in terms of the gap between the deep tech innovation and commercial scale, with where India's at and where it needs to be, and how it can try and partner with the US to try and close that gap so that it can do more in deep tech? I think you're on mute, sorry.
Thank you, Nigel. That's a great question to start. India has not been new to deep tech. It has raised to the occasion several times in the past decades, especially with nuclear tech, space, telecommunication, digital public infrastructure, supercomputing build-ups as well. In India, defense and space ecosystem itself has taped out more than 150 chips. They are all deployed in the real applications. But this was very small and niche market. Indian commercial chip design activity started sometime in mid 1990s with the TI taking the lead, followed by analog devices and Philips Semiconductors. And then it has evolved now in last 2 decades into one of the largest ecosystem for chip design and full stack development. There are more than 125,000 engineers working in this ecosystem. But most of these engineers are working in the cost center mode. They are working in a subsidiary of their parent company. So what they do in terms of chips, their ownership, their IP, their business, their profits, everything rests with the parent company and the parent ecosystem. Coming to Indian chip ecosystem, it has been very nascent. I think post-COVID, Indian government decided to provide some incentives to build this fabless design as well as fab ecosystems in India. Currently, for deep tech as well, there are several missions have been launched. For example, recently, government opened nuclear tech for private players. This is one of the pioneering effort. So I am seeing new nuclear tech companies, startups, and players likely to enter this market. Space tech has been opened. There are a lot of private space satellite builders, launch vehicle builders, rocket builders. Building startups have come out, have been incubated. Of course, this takes time. Coming back to semiconductors, DLI program has been one of the pioneering program of government under India Semiconductor Mission. This has created more than 25 real fabless semiconductor companies who have taped out chips, and more than 200 plus chips to startups. These are currently in defining and building their initial prototypes of the chips. For these companies, what government has done is they have provided incentives in the form of design linked incentive, which is like 50% of their design costs, as well as access to EDA tools through their collaboration with global EDA players like Synopsys, Cadence, Ansys, Siemens, etc. All those tools are available now free of cost to these Indian startups. This has actually triggered the growth of fabless semiconductor startups. I personally know many of these founders. I have been also part of this ecosystem. So many of these people have raised up to maybe $15 million of seed capital. The seed capital has not been a problem in recent times. And then they have also, many of them have taped out their chips. They are building systems, reference systems right now. And then they will further build their business in coming times. Coming back to the gaps, what you mentioned or asked, there are several gaps because this system is very new ecosystem. So first one is India is trying to build both system ecosystem as well as chip ecosystem at the same time. There are no large OEMs in India who can handhold this fabless semiconductor players like how they are in China or US or Europe or Japan for that matter. So this means a lot of more work for founders to get the buy-in from early customers and then ensure that that interest is kept, and it leads into the complete life cycle of development over 24 to 36 months. Right, this is a long period. So this is a challenge, in real world. The second thing is the capital to scale up, because most of the capital in India is for services-centric businesses. It has been historically. So Indian investors were not used to investing in deep tech businesses which have long gestation periods, like 24 to 36 months to launch the product, and then product support, and then life cycles are shorter many times. So this early stage investment problem has been solved, but scale up problem like capital like 50 million to 150 million, which is needed for a real good semiconductor play, and over, let us say, 2-3 cycles of iterative development, that is currently not available. We need to build that access to capital. Third thing is product build-up experience itself. Most of these founders of these initial startups, semiconductor startups, have come from global semiconductor companies. They have been part of design teams. They understand how to design chips, but they don't understand how to build a product and how to make it viable in a market and deploy. There are design is only one thing, tape out is only one thing, but building a system and ensuring that it works in the field is altogether another. So they need not just they need to gain this perspective as they build the chips and navigate this choppy waters, but also they need access to talent and expert people who have complementary skills in product management, supply chain, quality, manufacturing, application engineering, and likes of that, which are customer-centric, customer-facing roles. This is an area which I think with the existing ecosystem in India, these founders can easily build, because they can attract talent from the multinational companies who are all playing in India. These are some of the challenges. Of course, as they grow business, there are operational challenges. Of course, I will not like to dwell into them now, right? As such, so we can cross them when we cross the bridge.
It's really interesting, and I mean, a great perspective just to show. Remind us to take an ecosystem perspective when looking at what's required and what's changed, and then putting it in the current context in terms of how the US and India, respectively, domestically, are trying obviously to support domestic and foreign partners in their respective AI efforts. I mean, here in DC, we're waiting tentatively for a new AI executive order to come out, and so I mean, there's barely a day where something major doesn't come. Putting us in that context, given, I mean, the AI Impact Summit, there's the Indicative Trade Agreement, there's the Pax Silica membership with India, like looking at all of this, these initiatives bilaterally, hopefully as these move towards implementation, and this is just a general question to anyone on the panel, as these respective US-India initiatives move to implementation, what do you think is the most important thing that policymakers on the both sides need to get right? What is it that where should they be paying their attention now they've sort of set the framework for how they want the respective partners in both countries to work together on AI, on semiconductors? An open question to the panel.
Would you like me to go for it, Nigel?
Please, and then Dipakshi.
So first of all, there is a lot of excitement in India for the trade deal, which is in cooking for several months, quarters now, right? So Indian establishment, government, and stakeholders have made a lot of efforts to meet the expectations midway, also while taking care of our strategic national interests. I understand that the current interim trade agreement has been reached, and then there are some opportunities identified. So there are numbers like trade numbers are floating, and then there are high expectations being built around it. But then after this ITA has been signed, the world has jumped into a turmoil, right? So the supply lines are being cut in the fuel, energy, fertilizers. Inflations are rising, and logistics is becoming increasingly difficult. Geopolitical issues are coming up. So India is a mid economy, right? It is not a superpower economy. We are interdependent for many things on the global ecosystem, especially in the tech side, supply chain side. So if these disruptions continue to be for a long time, then they will drain the focus, energy, and all the efforts, and then people again will jump back into short-term focus of quarter-to-quarter management of businesses, and then forget about long-term deep tech investments, right? So we need to, the first challenge for the whole whoever is involved in the ecosystem is to bring the focus back on the trade, commerce, and job creation, and income generation, revenue growth, GDP growth, and those things back, and move away from the current key factors on the table. Second thing is to be very clearly understood or defined is, India needs investment and access to technology, and also Indian entrepreneurs and startups need market access, both. So there are concerns on both sides. So balancing and coming out with a win-win approach is very, very important, for this trade deal to come through and expectations, to be met. For example, I did a trip of US and met several investors. Most of them have apprehensions about how exits will be done from Indian company, how easy it is to repatriate the money back, profits back. So I am sure under this trade agreement, those things can be ironed out, and modalities can be quickly understood and defined and established. The second thing is market access for Indian companies into US market. India is investing a lot of money into certification, standardization. There are already joint collaborations under ISET framework with US government to work on 5G, 6G, Open RAN type of initiatives, which can be expanded to many other sectors as well. And then these can enable joint collaborating in R&D, as well as product certifications, market access programs, pilots, trials, which enable both Indian companies access to global markets as well as American companies access into Indian market. Right? These are the two things which I would like to focus on.
No, that all good comments. Just cognizant of time, I'll hand it over to Pakshi, but also for any final thoughts, to Pakshi, and then then Vikram to round us out. Just cognizant of where we are of time, but please, to Pakshi.
Sure. I think Arvind actually covered most of that. I will just add three nuances from the vantage point of, being in this policy sphere, I would say, for the last 2 decades. One really is that there is, like I mentioned, there is a lot of synergy between even the tech stack developments between US and India. So today, when we talk about the Indian manufacturing story, or for that matter, when India's build out of sovereign technology, a lot of the building blocks would really come out of the technologies and the patents that the US holds. And the technologies and the patents, perhaps, where the market share of the US companies is, I would say they are the dominant leaders. But at the same point in time, there is also, India also realizes with the kind of democratization that it can offer, it needs a seat at the table, which is to say that we don't really have a lot of harmonized standards today. So even if today, let's say Indian local OEMs, they're able to create systems and produce systems leveraging US technologies, to further Arvind's point, they don't have equal market access into the US either. And that's becoming increasingly, I would say, from a government and trade perspective, there is that realization that you need to focus on trade, you need to focus on volume, but it has to be a synergistic approach. The second piece, and this is where I think policy will really have to also step in, is just the very different model of AI diffusion that India or the global South would follow, vis-a-vis the digital infrastructure buildups that happen in US and the Western world. And that is really to say that the Indian model is not going to be that training heavy. It's really going to focus more on inferencing. It's really going to focus more on scale and reach. And that is where, when we talk about the agentic AI, which is really going to shape shift what happens in the ITES, physical AI, where industry in itself is going to go through a shape shift. There are, again, a lot of complementarities, because the trainings, or for that matter, the most strong models, the strongest models, do come from the US. But how do you really leverage those models to create local use cases is really going to is something that is going to define what that India story is going to be. In interest of time, I think I'll stop there, Nigel.
Great points. Vikram, to close us out.
Yep. Just, I think most of the points were covered, but just a couple of things. I think stability of policy is very important because, building an innovation ecosystem takes time. And while there is talent, and Arvind pointed out, you still need to have market access, you need to have product management, you need to have the entire product thinking coming through. And that's when India can really partner with US in a very big way. I think that stability of policy is very important because we are talking about a shift which might take more than just a few months, right? So that's something to look at. I think the second part is ensuring that there is equal market access on the products part, because instead of just looking at it as a low-cost talent supply model, there is more that can be done from innovation on both sides. So I think that is what I would like to summarize it as.
All good points. And I mean, I think the panelists have done a great job in providing everyone an overview of where things are at. That so many exciting developments to look back on, but in a challenging context in trying to keep respective policymakers on both sides looking ahead in terms of what do they need to do in terms of implementation to build on the initiatives they've already agreed and the investments and the commitments they've already made. And so with that, I want to thank our three panelists, and I want to hand it back over to Diego and Ken to close us out. Diego.
Thanks very much, Nigel. Super informative and really helpful. I find conversations around AI, the tech stack, emerging technologies, especially fascinating because of how fast things are changing. I learned something new every single time there's a conversation, even, if there was the following session, there's always something new. And I can only imagine how much we're going to have to unpack by the time our Trade and Tech Summit rolls around in December. Not only on trade and technology, but also seeing how the relationship plays out in the next couple of months between the US and India. Vikram and Arvind, thank you for joining us today as part of our new network in India. And I want to say a special thanks, and we're incredibly grateful to the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry and the Confederation of Indian Industry for helping us broaden the participation today of the seminar, and for the engagement around this program. Dipakshi, we work closely with your colleagues from Intel here in DC. Special thanks to Jordan for connecting us, and thank you for joining us now on the webinar platform. And of course, Nigel, always great to have you on as a moderator and speaker throughout our events. One last thanks, of course, is to the Embassy of India, specifically Dr. Ajay Kumar for his engagement and support throughout this entire planning and the execution of the seminar. And so with that, we have now reached the conclusion of our 3-day intensive trade seminar in India. We hope those are watching or listening to the recordings have found this program helpful in understanding the context of the current US-India relationship, but also how India is looking at trade and commerce worldwide. We will continue to dive deep into the many issues and the debates around trade policy at WIDA and explore a lot of the themes that we covered in the last 3 days. The intensive trade seminars are an important linchpin in our work as a convener of the global trade policy community, and we're delighted you could join us these past 3 days. As a reminder, you will receive the recordings for all 3 days. They are password protected. And if you have any issues logging in to watch any of the content, please email our team. And a special thanks to our team, Maya Ghazi, Callie Hummel, and Tarang, who is actually in India watching this program. We're glad to have hosted you all. Thank you to all of our partners, and thank you for tuning in, and we hope to